All right. Good morning, everybody. Today we're going to talk about an island called Cannibal Island or the Island of the Dead. Its original name is, you'll have to forgive me on these pronunciation, Nazoski Island. A lot of people don't know about the tragedy that happened here. So, first, I'll give a brief summary of what happened, then, we'll do a little bit of a deeper dive into it. I am going to throw up the graphic content warning, as you can see on the screen, because there are some pictures that are a little much for some people. So, in May of 1933, there was a mass deportation of around 6,700 prisoners to an island in the Soviet Union. The prisoners were sent to a small, isolated island in western Siberia. It was about 340 miles, again, forgive my pronunciation, of Tomsk, to construct a special settlement and to make the island livable under Stalin's orders. The prisoners were pretty much just dumped and abandoned on this island. They were left for only flour as food, and most had already been eaten on the long journey there. They had no tools and only the clothing that they were wearing, and no shelter against the unforgiving Siberian weather. If you don't know about Siberia, it's got some nasty weather you got to contend with. So those who attempted to leave the island were killed by armed guards. The results of this quickly caused widespread disease, abuse of power, violence, and eventually cannibalism. Within 3 months, over 4,000 of the estimated 6,700 people were dead, and the remaining were sick and starving. So this tragedy was pretty much not known about. I'm sure it was known about in Russia or places like that, but it happened in 1933. Classified reports were found in 2002, really bringing what happened here to light. These reports were published by the Communist Party of Western Siberia. Why these reports were finally decided to be published isn't known that I could find. I did see that there was a movement group called Memorial, and I believe that possibly they were the ones that got these documents released. And the original report was made in 1933. And I am so sorry, guys, on his name. He was a Soviet propaganda worker, and I'm going to say his name was Vasily A. Velisko. So the basis of these mass deportations to harsh, barren lands was to make the land of about 4,000 square miles somewhat populated and to be self-sufficient within 2 years. The plan was approved by the Council of Peoples of the USSR on March 11th, 1933. So this is a picture of what the island looked like back then. And so this kind of, you can see it's not a very big island. This is a picture of it today, and it kind of gives you more of an idea of what these people had to live on. This is it. That's it. So there were possibilities of crossing the river, but I'll get into this as to why this did not happen here in just a little bit. Whoa, how did I do that? I'm not sure. Okay. The prisoners or deportees were targeted and selected by USSR officials. Pretty much peasants, the poor, and the people that were unwanted in the city were the air quote prisoners that we speak of. Many of them came from Moscow and Leningrad, and these people were unable to obtain internal passports in December of 1932 when they became issued. They were required for you to have in large cities pretty much. This was done to weed out the people to deport ahead of time. They called it a cleansing of the city. If you didn't have one of these internal passports, you were technically still a citizen of the country, but you were not a citizen of the city, so you were subject to arrest. It's crazy. I haven't heard of that before, but apparently it happened. So these big cities were getting crowded due to widespread famine in the country. Rural areas outside of the city. I lost my place. Sorry, guys. Some of these deportees, okay, so they were from the rural areas outside the cities pretty much, and they came into the cities looking for work, food, anything for a way to survive. And they thought it would be easier to do in big cities. So if they wished you to be deported, you would simply be deported. So some of the peasants were actually able to get these internal passports, but I'm not really sure how that worked. It was pretty much a thing where the police of these big cities were in charge of deciding who did or didn't get to stay in the city. So if a peasant had a passport, they would say, "Let me see your passport." You'd say, "Okay." You'd give them your passport. They'd rip it to shreds, say you didn't have one, and arrest you for not having one. Most of the people that were arrested were deported within 2 days. But to be clear, not all that were arrested went to the island. Some were sent to other labor camps. Some were simply thrown out of the cities. And in between March to July of 1933, 86,000 people were removed from these cities. May Day holiday was assigned to the transit camp in the city of Tomask. So let me get a picture up here of this. So this is the Tomask region pretty much. And as you can see, you have the Nazarene Island. That is actually what Cannibal Island is called. So that's what you see right here in this little picture. It's a lot harder to see on this map. So all deportees were required to pass through a transit camp at Tomask, Amask, or Archiskask, the largest being Tomask. It was built to hold about 15,000 people. By April, 25,000 people were there, even though the camp was not completed. The transit camps were basically just a pit stop on the way to where they were eventually going. River transport was supposed to take these deportees to their final labor camps, but wasn't able to be done until late May due to the ice that was on the Ob and Tom rivers. That is where they were pretty much transported with. They were transported by river boats. The authorities of Tomask were unhappy about the delays, stating that people were starving and sick, and they were concerned about the sickness that could spread to their town and cause a contagious outbreak within their cities. 2 trains arrived from Moscow and Leningrad on May 10th to Tomask. The Tomask authorities did not know what to do with this huge number of deportees. There was absolutely no more room left in the transit station. Since it was already about 10,000 people over what it was already allowed to have. So they decided to send them to work sites. Anyone who refused to work or tried to escape, riot, or talk back were killed by mounted police on the spot. Finally, a solution was decided to send the deportees to Nazino Island. It was 500 miles north. It was an empty and uninhabited area besides a few indigenous people. So let me pull up this picture. 4 river barges were filled with 5,000 people. Deportees were kept below deck and fed 7 ounces of flour a day. 20 additional tons of flour were sent to go to the island, which would equal out to about 9 pounds per person. So the barges arrived at the island on May 18th. It was a swampy island, only about 2 miles long and around 650 yards wide. There was no roster or list, so to speak, of people who were actually loaded onto these barges. But when they arrived, there were 322 women, 4,556 men, and 27 dead bodies. Over a third of the arrivals were said to be too weak to even stand and had to be drug off the barges. On May 27th, an additional 1,200 people arrived on the island. So they tried to unload these 20 tons of flour the next day, and the guards were swarmed and attacked by the starving prisoners. The guards began firing and retreated back to the barges with the flour. Finally, they were able to unload the flour on the opposite side of the island. 150 people were assigned to hand out flour evenly, but as you would expect, power moves happened, and many didn't receive any flour at all. A lot of people tried mixing their flour in the river with the water, the swamp water, and they contracted, forgive my pronunciation again, dysentery. It's basically a bacterial infection that causes you to have diarrhea, fever, cramps, and if it's not treated, you will die. Many people tried to escape onto rafts, but were hunted down by guards from the barge and killed. So basically, let me go back to this picture. So basically, the reason that they couldn't get off this island is because whether they tried to swim or whether they tried to build a raft to get across, there were the 4 barges that came and they pretty much surrounded this little island. And there were guards that were stationed on these barges. So if there were any attempts to escape, then, you were pretty much just shot on the spot. So order on the island quickly deteriorated and chaos began. Many of the deportees were city dwellers and knew nothing about how to make an island habitable. This island was honestly, in my opinion, not habitable to begin with, but regardless, the small amount of resources caused groups to form. The stronger groups took control of any food, shelter, and possessions of the dead. Even the guards living on the barges would kill random deportees for no reason. They lived in a constant state of hunger and terror. With all the food gone in June of 1933, that is when the cannibalism began. On June 21st, the guards counted around 50 bodies that had signs of being cannibalized. So due to the horrid circumstances, in late June, the settlement dissolved and the surviving 2,856 people were transferred to a smaller settlement upstream. 257 people were simply left behind to die on the island as they were deemed too sick to move. Several hundred more died during the transfer to the new settlement. And then when they arrived to this newer settlement, they were going through a typhus outbreak. Typhus? Yeah, that sounds right. Sorry, guys. My pronunciation is horrible. They were going through a typhus outbreak, which ended up killing a bunch more. So in a 13-week period, 1,500 to 2,000 people died of exposure, starvation, disease, and murder. Another 2,000 had disappeared or their bodies were simply unidentifiable. This is a memorial cross that was put up in, I believe, Tomsk for all the people that either died at those camps or on the island. So the last thing we're going to do here is we're going to close this out with an eyewitness statement. So this was actually an indigenous man that lived on the other side of the island. So here it goes. They were trying to escape. They asked us, where's the railway? Where's Moscow or Leningrad? We had never heard of a railway or the cities they spoke of, as we were indigenous people. We had never left our towns and villages here. People were starving. The things we saw were things we could never forget. They were killing each other, eating each other. They were starving to death. So I know this was a little bit rough, guys, but I had not heard about Cannibal Island until maybe about 6 months ago. And I started looking into it, and it was a really, really, I can't imagine being somebody on those barges and being put on those islands and just being mass deported for absolutely no reason. But let me know what you guys think in the comments, and I hope you guys have a good day. I'm going to cut this live off, so see ya.